Everybody who's
Yeah.
coming on, we're going to be getting started shortly. We're just going to wait until y'all get into the room, but we're talking hats and shoes. Dan's showing off his collection of hats that he's got. So
Christmas, just the Christmas ones. If I showed off my other hats, then that would be magnificently
I
wild.
like
Look at
that
this one.
one.
See?
That
Not
Shelby,
bad.
that actually makes me think of you, Shelby. That hat.
Yeah,
The Shelby hat.
I was
Now, if
thinking
it
this,
was
Dan.
bedazzled, like no, though if it was Shelby, it would be covered with sequins and bedazzled, and it would
Oh,
probably a disco
well,
ball happening somewhere.
this may not be you, but I got sequins covered for
Oh,
it.
that's the one.
Those are nice.
That's a very, that looks like a sheep. What is that on the front of that hat? Is it a reindeer?
I think it's Santa sleeping. It's not really. Yeah, you're right. It's more sheep, isn't it?
Oh no, it is. Okay, now I see it. Santa.
I'm looking out for my Kiwi and Scottish friends right now. Yeah, definitely.
I
I'm
think
being
those of you,
sheepish.
you're being sheepish. As you're streaming in, if you see a hat of Dan's that you'd like him to wear, feel free to throw that in the chat. We'll. I'm feeling.
What else we got
I'm
here?
looking around my office to see if I have anything that's hat resembling a hat here that I can join.
Oh, here we
I do
go.
not.
There's the full. Get back up for this one.
Oh yeah. And just in case you
People
thought
are
that
like,
was a fancy backdrop that Dan had behind him, no, that is Dan's real life happening over there. He's at the North Pole.
Christmas came. I mean, we celebrate Christmas, so we decorated this past weekend. Normally, we wait for December 1st, but it's a pandemic, so our family said, "Get out the 28 boxes, Dad. Let's go." So the office got decorated as well.
I don't think you're alone. I think everybody did that. I saw so many. I know, Shelby, you did that, didn't you? You got your Christmas decorations up this past weekend. I'd like to, I want to do an informal chat poll. Those of you in the chat who got your Christmas decorations up this weekend, who's going to fess up to that if you are celebrating Christmas? I was in my local community group saying that I was looking forward to Christmas, but it felt a little early. And one of my neighbors said, well, just celebrate Diwali. You can get the lights out and,
There you go.
And I'm like, yeah, actually, I should just like embrace all cultural celebrations. And then I could be partying through till February.
It's true. We got Chinese New Year. So just keep going. It's basically 3 months.
Yeah. I love, Jen, that you've already got your gifts under your tree. Holy smokes, that's I realized I haven't bought enough gifts, and now with lockdown, I'm going to be in a bit of trouble. What's happening on the island, Dan? Are you guys in lockdown yourselves right now, or are you pretty free to go your business?
For those of you I don't know, I'm in Victoria in Oak Bay, and it's sort of a bit like La La Land here. Not although the province is under orders to not have anyone over, so you're kind of on a mini lockdown. The Fraser Valley, Surrey, and Vancouver are really having a tough time right now.
Yeah, I think too, don't you have to quarantine if you go over to Vancouver Island? If you're not from Vancouver Island, don't outsiders have to go into quarantine for 2 weeks?
Basically, Vancouver Island has turned itself into New Zealand, and it pretends it's its own country. And we've got Jacinda in charge, who we call Dr. Bonnie Henry, and we're good. Yeah, that's how we're rolling.
I think you and PEI, those are the places to be right now in the country. Like, go get off the mainland and get over to the islands. You'll be okay. Yeah, all right. Exactly. Well, let's get going, I think. Hey, Shelby, we'll get this show on the road. Welcome, everybody. So great to see some familiar names, and welcome to those of you who are with us for the first time. So I am excited to be here with my friend, Dan Pontefract, who is a multi-time author. We're going to obviously talk about his one book, but Dan, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Glain. So good to be here. And in the background, thank you, Shelby, for doing all you do.
Yeah, Shelby is the woman on the job. So just as a reminder, we're going to keep the lines muted for now, but feel free to use the chat. I love seeing the chats come in. If Dan's saying something that's really resonating with you, feel free to throw an aha or give us some love. Let us know that you're enjoying that. And as always, for me, the whole point of these exercises is to give you guys the questions that you want answered, right? We're so lucky to have Dan with us today. that, it's a chance for you to pick his brains using that vulture speak. I was told once never to, I actually had somebody say to me, do not say pick your brains. I am not a carcass. You are not a vulture. So I got to change my language. But anyway, we've got Dan here. And so if you've got questions that are coming up for you, I've got a few that we're going to kick off with as always. But put them in the Q&A or put them in the chat. Shelby will keep an eye on them for me as well. I'll be kind of keeping my eye out on it too. But I want you to get what you want out of this. This is what I think our objective is here today. So feel free to chime in. All right. So Dan, give us the 411. I think everybody has probably looked you up, read the bio, but give us a little bit of context setting. This is your 4th book. Okay, let me hold it up so those who have not seen it. Lead, Care, Win: How to Become a Leader Who Matters. Honestly,
you do this.
Oh yeah, nice. Even better. I have to say, I think I said this to you because this is your 4th book, which for me is like, holy smokes. This is my favorite book of yours, hands down. I love it. It's fantastic. But what made you want to put yourself through? Because I've written 2 books. I mean, the punishment of writing a book. What made you want to put yourself through it for a 4th time?
Yeah, where did the masochistic tattoo come from? And why would I do this again? It keeps me married to Denise, so I'm out of her hair because she has hair and I don't, so that's good. You know what? First of all, Glain, thank you so much for saying what you just said about the book being my best, and here's why. I agree, not to be pretentious and very un-Canadian, but I wrote the first 3 books, which was one about corporate culture, one about purpose, and one about thinking, or a better form of thinking, like I thought business books ought to be written, which means 80,000+ words, chock full of, depending on the book, 20 to 40 interviews, hardback, litany based, but with not just quotations, but citations. So to have cited over 100 pieces of work, because I've researched, I read the book in the paper, then I would include it and, footnote it to where I figured out it went into the storyline of the book. And then for some that don't know, I used to be an executive with SAP and with TELUS. And so, in charge of leadership and learning and engagement and all kinds of cool stuff from a corporate culture perspective. Loved it. But also those first 3 books were written as an executive in big time corporate companies. And so I don't think I ever, in retrospect, and this is me probably being totally honest, never really found my voice. I found a corporate voice. And so I thought a business book ought to be all the things I just alluded to. And I'm proud of the books, but had I not left TELUS as I did on January 1st, 2019, it's the day I started writing Lead, Care, Win. And I was untethered by kind of corporate speak, but I also, because I'm a huge Beatles fan, and by no means is this analogous, but when the Beatles stopped touring, they went back in the studio and said, hey, what can we do different? Because now we don't have to think about how we'll play that album to audiences that are screaming. And so the difference between their albums up to Pepper, Sgt. Pepper, to Sgt. Pepper was like kind of night and day. I mean, yes, you might have the Revolver, and yes, you might have Rubber Soul as steps towards Sgt. Pepper, but Sgt. Pepper is as night to day from albums like Help or etc. And so anyway, the point being is that on January 1st, 2019, Glain, I said, I need to find my voice and I want to help people become better versions of themselves. So stop being pretentious, just be you, find your voice, Dan, and stop interviewing a gazillion people. You're just about to turn 50. So why don't you share what at least you think helps people to become better leaders of self and of others. And so that was my moment.
Yeah, I love it. And and your voice really comes through. Like you really, as I was reflecting on this today, actually, was this idea that when you read this, it does feel like you're just in a conversation with you. So I think you did a great job on that, which is terrific. So what I loved about, I'm a sucker for a visual, and I'm also a sucker for simplicity. And what I really love, and I'm going to just sort of hold this up for people that they can sort of see this, is that Dan's got this great kind of like circular visual. I'm also a sucker for circles. Those of you round table, you know, I'm all about the beautiful loop that circles make. But you have these 9 different kind of characteristics, or what would you call them, practices of leadership that you've sort of called out, and I'll read them out really quickly for everybody, but I'm quite curious to hear your answer to my first question. So the 9 are: be relatable, play for meaning, stay present, remain curious, embrace change, dare to share, command clarity, commit to balance. That's one of my personal favorites. And then champion others. And what I was curious about as I was reading through the book, there were some that I thought to myself, you know, some of these were very much in my DNA as a leader right from the get-go. And some of these I've actually had to learn. And so I'm kind of curious for you, as you put this together and you're reflecting on it, which were the ones that for you as a leader in organizations are very much part of your DNA, and which are the ones that you've had to flex into over time?
Oh, well, with the magic of wizardry, I can just pull that up.
And people can focus on it. I love
it. So for me, of those 9, the ones that personally, I suppose I took pride in were certainly lesson number 1, be relatable. I, like you just alluded to, which was very, again, kind of you. I would bring I'd bring red shirt Dan, wear a hat Dan, talk about your kids Dan, cry at work Dan, loathe about hating golf Dan, to the workplace. Like I suppose, relatable. What you saw is what you got. I wasn't Teflon. I didn't think I needed to be tough. I think I was polite and civil, but I would ask questions about families. I would know every kid's name of the people who I worked with, just because I wanted to know. And I would have an Evernote or you know, this thing that I always have, my kind of pocketbook of notes to remind myself or remember things and memorize things. So I guess, yeah, be relatable, certainly. And maybe that's why now that you asked the question, it's probably why I introspectively now opened up the book with that lesson. How can we be more relatable? How can we be empathic? That's really what the lesson is about. It's when we're asking those questions, when we're cognitively, emotionally, you know, feeling and thinking about others, you can relate to them in their situation. So I think certainly be relatable is number 1. I think number 5, embrace change. And the reason lesson 5, embrace change, I think also resonates for me personally is that, I mean, look at what I'm doing right now. I reached out to the founder of Evernote, Phil, because I knew he was up to something new. And this thing called MMHMM, which is what you're seeing with this crazy graphics and things going on behind me, et cetera. He's like, yeah, I thought, you know, the way in which the pandemic was playing out, people using Zoom and Teams and Skype, it sucked. So could we do something different? I was like, Phil, this is fantastic. Can I use it in the alpha and the beta? He's like, sure. So I guess I was always willing to try things and embrace the change, whether it was, you know, at TELUS in 2010, now that I think about it, we used virtual worlds to do onboarding and induction of hundreds of people on a quarterly basis. So we'd have some face-to-face, but we'd literally bring them into a virtual world and sort of teach them that way. So I think embrace change certainly was one. It wasn't you must embrace change. I think I led by example, I suppose, of, hey, why not? It doesn't have to be perfect. Let's give it a go. Like, who knows what we'll find at the end of this road? And if it's disastrous, well, at least we learned something, which I think is lesson 4, which is the third one I'll speak to. Is it 4? Yeah, remain curious. So again, like, I'm just naturally curious, but I'm okay with trying something out, and then let's see what we might learn from this. And if it's a mistake, that's okay. Tuition value in mistakes. So Yeah, to be put on the spot there and not having thought of it. I think lesson one, be relatable, certainly embracing change, number five, and then coming back to being sort of a learning guy, a learning professional, certainly remain curious, number four.
Hmm. So which are the ones, so what's the one that you've had to really pay more attention to and cultivate over the years out of these
Oh,
9 lessons?
that's easy. Yeah, that's totally easy. Number eight, commit to balance.
Mm,
Um, Commit to balance. The reason why I sort of ended the book with commit to balance, which then leads into ultimately championing others. It's like a yin yang lesson pack there. When you commit to balance, you're doing two things. First of all, you're committing to your own balance, but then you're looking out and thinking of others and the balance of what is the makeup of your team. Now, makeup comes in different ways, right? And certainly, like all of us, and I was in the throes of writing and editing the book when much of the civil unrest was occurring south of the
mm,
border, and whether whoever it was, I mean, we don't have to name the names, right? We know what was happening
mm,
from years of uh, disgrace, basically, in our organizations, from equitable pay of women to the diversification of your team and your organization, and thinking about things not just like LGBTQ and race and gender, but ageism and things I didn't think about, to be honest, when I was 30 and 40. And in hindsight, looking back as a leader, yes, I think I promoted certain ideals, but I don't think I did as good a job as I could have, for example, in things like making sure I had Indigenous representation somewhere in a team of 150 people, because I should have. And so I think commit to balance was a wake up call for me to write personally that I think I failed in certain times as a leader, but that there are other components to it that I think I did okay. Like, for example, balance also means prior to the pandemic, well before, I encouraged everyone to have a flexible work style. So I didn't care where you worked. You didn't have to come into an office. Didn't care if you worked from home. It was more, results-based um, leadership, I suppose.
mhm.
And then I still, like, even now, what I worry about is people, leaders, particularly post-pandemic, saying, "All right, call your ass back into the office now. I want to see you hammer around on the keyboard because I couldn't see you before." So
Yeah.
so commit to balance. Story short is it's really introspectively looking at yourself and saying, "What can I do to help the makeup, basically, of the team and how the team functions, but also yourself, what you believe in, and how much you commit yourself to balance in a better, more perfect way."
Yeah, I think this is, I personally love this particular chapter. It really definitely got my head thinking. And I think one of the things that I was curious about and was coming up for me, and I'd love to kind of get your perspective of it, because you've been in the big, Fortune 100 size businesses and publicly traded and all of that kind of thing. And, there's plenty of data that would say we're totally out of balance in organizations. Organizations are psychopathic in their nature, frankly. And as senior leaders in organizations, that commitment to balance, and particularly, I have a hot button around pay. I saw your post about a certain coffee company this morning as well, in terms of minimum
Oh,
wage.
we can talk about that as
We,
a
like,
climate.
I'm with you. And I think one of the things that I think is really interesting as leaders to challenge ourselves to commit to balance, I do get stuck in my own story that how easy is that for leaders to do when there is shareholder pressure outside that's saying, well, we want our returns, and like, so for example, one of the conversations I was having this morning is, we did really great in the pandemic. We blew the lights out in the pandemic because we were, working like crazy. And now let's increase our revenues by X percent, Y% for 2021. And I think for me, this idea of, what's enough, and and as part of our problem here is we just have too many boiled frogs at the top of the house that are numb to the fact that we're not able to commit to balance because of all these other pressures. So how do we solve for this? I'm so curious to get your thoughts.
Well, part of it, I think, is actually lesson two, play for meaning,
Mm,
in part. So that particular lesson actually scolds the organization's ethos if it is not committed to serving all stakeholders fairly, equitably, and with a sense of purpose. So, let's look at that big, large coffee chain that we're referring to just as an example, and then we'll get to sort of examples of perhaps how you can change your thinking. So there's no doubt that this particular coffee company that's very green and has thousands of outlets around the world has suffered, like many retailing type businesses have suffered as a result of the pandemic. And that suffering is obviously causing strife within the executive quarters of what they're going to do. And so revenues are down. Okay, we get that. You're a publicly traded company. We get that. Typically, a company alerts the analysts to say, they signal, if you will, this is what we're going to give back in dividends. So here's our dividend schedule, as well as, they signal to how we're going to buy back shares. And just to make the language real simple, dividends is if you own a share, you get a certain percentage of cash back, based on EPS. And then a buyback means if there's, stock that's floating out there, the company decides to buy back the stock that's out in the float so that they drive down how many actual shares are floating, which then does basically stock gymnastics to allow the stock then to eventually push itself back up. It's for a select few people who obviously have invested in the millions of dollars in these companies, this green coffee company being one. So let's dissect this. Last year, before the pandemic, 2019, they had spent $12 billion on dividends, which is giving cash back to shareholders and buying back shares. In 2020, right when the pandemic is kind of at its height in March, they signal again, basically the same process. They're going to buy back this year, fiscal 2020, X million number of shares, and they're going to continue their dividend schedule. In fact, they increased it. Now, again, to simplify it and dumb it down, where does the money come from to pay for the dividends and the buybacks? Profit. Now, sometimes you'll see companies that'll go and get a big credit line, and they'll kind of use that to fudge the numbers, but nonetheless, they still have access to liquid capital like cash. So this company decides also over the last 3 to 4 months to close just about 1,000 stores across the planet. And if each store has an average, right, of 25 employees, we're talking 25,000 people that are been put out of job, full or part-time. So my argument is this: if you're playing for meaning, you take a hard look at ultimately, okay, sure, stores may be underperforming, and yeah, I get it, like things happen in a pandemic, but might you also potentially find ways in which to say, you know what, we're going to not issue a dividend this year, and here's why. We're not going to buy back stock this year, and here's why. And we're going to try whatever we can as best as possible to save as many jobs, or to invest so that we might hire more people in our technology division, whatever. That's the kind of playing for all stakeholders, like working for all stakeholders, that I'm getting at. When you fixate and your bottom line decision is only on said stock market or the bottom line itself, then I start to worry, because you're not serving all stakeholders and you're paying lip service to what you're telling people publicly in your marketing, that you serve the planet, that you serve the community, that you do this, you do that. When in fact, when the chips are down or like things are pretty pressurized, you just forget all that. And that's frightening to me.
Yeah, and I think they are so they're so interconnected. So I love the the sort of the connection between this balance and the play for purpose. I think the other thing too, which my take in a lot of well, I guess it's my take period. I sort of came into the world of work as pay for performance really started taking off. And I think it's one of the worst things we've ever done in organizations. We've put the emphasis on the individual, And you can see how executive compensation has skyrocketed as a result of performance. So what are we incenting? You know, you incent things, you get the behavior that you're incenting, right? And I think that's where I think, honestly, I harp on this a bit with our community. Those of you who, you know, listen to me all the time is, you know, it takes courage to say, okay, maybe as senior executives, we shouldn't be getting paid 300 times the front line. It used to be 3 times.
Right.
Now it's 300. That's ridiculous. Let's just put that out there, right? And I think, but then when you're in it and you all sit magnanimously around the table going, oh, I'm worried about my people below who are under all this pressure and blah, blah. Okay, well then cough back half of your compensation. Come on, let's do it. Right. And I think that's the part that we've kind of lost the thread on. I love Dan Pink's work around motivation and what really motivates us. And I just feel like, you know, we've done some things to ourselves that make it almost, it's hard. Like when, you know, like when I was going through your book, I'm like, I'm on the tour. And yet we put some structures that don't really make it easy for us to stay on this tour. What would you say?
Well, as much as I was, you know, like knocking my own writing and the books prior to Lead, Share, Win, one of my favorite interviews ever for the Purpose Effect was Dan Price. And he is the founder and CEO of Gravity Payments. Now, I interviewed him in 2015 when he had a week earlier, and I happened to be in Seattle, and I happened to hear about this kid, basically, who was giving up his $1 million a year salary to fund, the company was kind of small at the time. They had about 35 odd people and he was making a lot of cash. It was a financial service transaction company. So they kind of like take percentage, right? Anyway, so he says, all right, what am I doing? Kind of looked in the mirror, like early 30s guy, looks in the mirror and says, what am I doing? Do I need all this money? No. So he gives himself, I think, 125 grand or 100 grand salary. And he takes the other 900 or so and says, I'm going to bump up everyone who's not making 70 grand a year to 70 grand a year with what kind of is remaining. And it was a year and a half schedule because they couldn't quite get everyone right away. But then a couple other executives at the company were like, oh, well, maybe I should do this too. Anyway, I caught up with him again just after the pandemic hit in April, and he has bought another company in Idaho. He's grown the business 8-fold, he told me, and he's still continuing to kind of, you know, give himself a 2% bump. But he's like, what? I'm having fun. These people are loving life. Everyone wants to work here. I got a bigger pick of the litter. We're growing like in spades. Our customers love us. Everyone's happy. Like, this is Dan, I don't understand. And so now he's a wonderful example. If you follow him on Twitter or LinkedIn, I mean, he's just cunningly going after other CEOs and executives whom continue to live this kind of lie of being two-faced, you know, saying one thing and not actually behaviorally changing behind the scenes how they operate.
Yeah, anyway, I find that whole thing, we could talk for this for hours, but I want to get back to some other things in the book that everybody, I think, could really benefit from hearing. But this to me is such a hot button topic. Anyway, let's go back. Like, I want to go back to that play for meaning, because one of the things that I really loved in the book that you sort of talked about was this idea of thinking about how you play for meaning through 3 lenses. And I was reflecting on my own entrepreneurial journey. Like, as an entrepreneur, you kind of get really clear on what's my purpose? What am I here to do? How do I want, like, your transition, right? From going from big corporate into Dan and, you know, Dan Inc. You have this sort of view of, you know, you really get connected to your purpose if you're, you know, clear on your entrepreneurship. But when I thought back and when I was in a comment, I don't know that I was all that clear, right? Like, I don't know that I was really thinking about, you know, this idea of playing for meaning for myself in that way. And you sort of talk about, you know, look at it through 3 lenses of work, developmental, and impact. And I'd love you to sort of talk about that, and then particularly the impact piece, because I think that often gets overlooked.
Yeah, I mean, okay, well, what I find happens, I suppose, is that we're far too busy to have that self-audit. and really being critical of how we're coming to the game, to the match, to the office, to the meeting, to the endeavor, to the family relationship, to whatever. Like, and that busyness, which is something I harp on in one of the lessons as well, to stay present, as I call it, really lends itself, first and foremost, that's what you've kind of got to do. You've got to audit. You got to have the time to audit and be crystal clear and precise in your own analysis of where you're at. So then, first of all, then you kind of have a chance, I hope, to then go into those dimensions. So from a work perspective, one of the questions I ask is, how do you want to be known when you leave a room? And I think that's a fundamental question, whether it's a virtual room like this, again, or a real room where you can actually hug someone. And often people miss out on the cues that allow them to be known as and thought of as a better leader, a good person. You know, whether it is some of those civility things like saying gesundheit or bless you when someone sneezes, holding the door, you know, being a bully and aggressive, allowing people to speak, asking for their opinion because they've been quiet. You know, Glain, I want to, what did, you know, that meeting two meetings ago, you know, you talked about that customer. Could we hear that part of, like that? So that's kind of the work piece. On the development piece, again, when you're almost giving up on your skill set and you think that you've got it all, and you think, again, that you know, you're the smartest person in the room, I say you're in the wrong room. We cannot for a second here, like, stop the path to the waterfall, as I call it, which is that developmental journey. Your ability not just to read and take a course, but to be open to something that's you've never experienced before, or that you should put yourself into that line of fire because you don't know what it feels like. So, you know, whether that is generally having a way in which to see how others view what it is that they're experiencing. That's a developmental piece, and that shows that you're playing for me, and that shows that there's purpose in your head and your heart for how you lead. So again, that's kind of the work and developmental. And then you kind of have to think about impact. Again, what is it that not just people remember you for, but how do you want to contribute to the society? So the pandemic hit, and again, it sounds pretentious, but I just want to provide an example. The pandemic hit, I'm in the middle of editing and writing this book. And my heart actually went out to many of my author and speaker friends whom, like, that's their gig. They don't have consulting, and they don't have either, you know, retainer contracts. They speak and they write. That's their gig. But a lot of them are my dear friends. And, you know, when the world fell off a cliff, let's say Friday the 13th in March, and for about a week, you know, I was listening in, there were emails or some Facebook groups, right? You're just kind of, I'm listening, kind of trying to figure out, I guess, the impact I might want to have with my friends. Some of them I don't even know. They're just, like, you know, in the entourage of the speaker author business. And they were worried, like, kind of, some of them deer in headlights. Yeah. And so I just sort of said to myself, all right, well, I know how to do stuff. Why don't I do a twofold thing? Run a conference that allows these folks potentially a voice and an avenue, maybe, to others. They might not see them before, and they can work on their virtual delivery skills or what have you. And then I said, well, I don't need the money, but we could use this as a way in which to, you know, raise money for Red Crescent and Red Cross Society, who then could double or triple, in some cases, the amount donated in order to serve people in need during the COVID crisis. So we're talking literally, Glenn, like March 20th now, the Friday. And so on a month later, April the 20th, I ran Speak Aid. And Speak Aid was...
You had a great lineup.
I don't think I'll do it again. But it was 40 speakers, including me, 5 days, 8 speakers a day, starting at 8 Pacific, so 11 Eastern, on that Monday, the 20th of April, and running the whole week. And we had 2,800 people show up. And in total, a little $5 here, $20 here,
Yep.
we raised $33,000.
It's amazing.
Which I feel proud for or about, but also, again, looking at the 40 or 39, I guess, speakers. So that's the impact example. I would want leaders to look at, say, well, what can I do to serve the community, my team, myself? How can I learn? You know, that whole work, developmental, and impact kind of lens was a good one for me to use with this Speak Aid example, because it hit all three. And I didn't take a dime. I was glad to hand over a check to Red Crescent Society in order to help others.
Yeah, that's a great example, and I think often, you know, when we're in organizations, we lose sight of those things. We get so fixated on the rung on the ladder or the next promotion or the things like that, that we, you know, this broadening of your lens and view of your career and the impact that you can have both within the job, but then also outside of the job. I love that story. Yes. That Speak Aid, I had quite a few of my friends on there. It was great to see, you know, the profile that they were getting. And you're right, there was a lot of panic for people at the front end of the pandemic. So, which is probably, we were talking earlier just before we kind of started up everything, you know, that's one of the things that I'm seeing. Like, this has been such a journey, right? So when everything blew up, yes, Friday the 13th in March was really that defining day. People went in all kinds of different crises, right? You were either in crisis because your business, you were making toilet paper and you could not keep up with demand, you're in that industry, or you were in crisis because you were in the entertainment or hospitality industry and everything shut down. Or
people you spend and take on adventures.
That was weird.
Okay, something happening. I was gonna say, or you're in crisis because you're having to get your team set up and work from home and all of those kinds of things. So there was a lot of, like, it was very frenetic, I found, in the first. And for all of us, none of us had lived through a pandemic before. We didn't know what a pandemic was. We didn't know what was going to happen. They were saying 2 weeks. We were all kind of hunkering down on our couch to do work, thinking, okay, I'll be back in the office in a couple of weeks. Now I find, you know, we've kind of gone through supper, things eased up. We're now, you know, I'm here in Toronto talking to you, and we're back in lockdown again, and we're in restriction. Winter is coming and it's getting darker, and, you know, Christmas isn't going to be a family affair in all likelihood. And so it's a very different mood. And one of the things that's been a kind of chronic conversation these days that I've been having, especially in the last few weeks, is about that. It's about how are we going to get our teams and ourselves through this? What are the things that I'm hearing from a lot of leaders that are saying, I'm not really sure what to do. I'm not sure where I should be. And at the same time, there's this pressure on, we're talking 2021 targets, that no company is asking for less. Like, I've not spoken to one client that said, we're actually going to dial it back for next year. That's just not the way organizations go, right? So when you think about, you know, some of the areas in the book, or just generally, what's some of the things, advice that you would have for folks that are on the call right now that are maybe feeling their own mojo's going a little flat, and they're worried about the team and this mental health slide that we're going into as we enter phase 2 of this long, slow grind?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I end the book with the lesson champion others, which is sort of lesson number 9, is, I think, indicative of the fact that as a leader, it may not be the first thing you think about, but I want it to be the last thing you think about. And that is, all right, in every interaction, in every email, in every meeting, in moments of reflection, how can I champion the cause of the team member, the other, the community member, et cetera? So let's go specific and dig down deeper on this thought with the team member. So it doesn't matter what data points you read. I'm a data wonk, but I have been looking at the data from whomever that releases it over the last 5 months. And although we were on a pretty good pace of of engagement increase and stress reduction. The pandemic's thrown all of that data points out, i.e. disengagement is increasing, engagement's going down, mental health and wellness is certainly decreasing, levels of stress are increasing. And again, I'm looking at it with the EU data, the American data, the Canadian data, it's the same. So irrefutably, right, irrefutably, you've got angst from whatever that may be as a result of coming from the pandemic. Could be health, could be family, could be lockdown, could be the stress of the business. The ridiculous do more with less mantra seems to have found its groove again.
I know.
Here, and it's
Did we
anyway,
kill that off in the 80s? Like that is the one. It's back.
Like hula hoops and pet rocks, it is back in business. Do more with less. So to champion others, really, again, it's an existential question and exercise, because if you're not thinking about how this might impact the team member, this being whatever, fill in the blank, right? And you're only thinking about, again, next year's targets or the commercial ingredients and requirements to be successful, to continue. You've got to actually do both, because without healthy, vibrant, engaged, calm, copacetically collaborative team members, it doesn't matter what target you set. It doesn't matter what project you put on a piece of paper to say, we're going to do this in Q2 of 2021. It doesn't matter. Like it's balderdash. So to champion others in the context of setting strategy and goals and vision and if you are not doing it with the team, but also asking about things like, I yap about, Kawhi Leonard and the 2019 Raptors win. And I yap about this because of what Masai and the management did, what's called load balancing. So everyone's like, what's load balancing? This thing's great. Well,
it's pretty controversial too, though, right? Like, I mean, there's a lot of people that,
Well, again, there's sort of, I came to see Kawhi tonight and he's benched. Why? I paid money to see, the Raptors, Kawhi. They still won the game. Lowry's pretty good. Ibaka was pretty good when he was with us. But they did load balancing, meaning they prevented him from playing in 22 of the regular season games, so they could kind of hold his body together for the quest and the ultimate goal, which was to win a championship. So when you're not championing others, you're practicing load imbalancing. And when you're load imbalancing, that means you actually, as the French say, je ne care pas about, the hearts and minds of your people. And so if you can't actually have an existential conversation and question about load, about health, about wellness, about stress, about how is this impacting, this being the pandemic, how is it impacting my team, and be honest and open about it, that's step one. That was a big thing to unpack. But then what you've really got to do is then come back to lesson one and about that relatability quotient. So what are you doing in the midst of a pandemic? Again, like, look, this isn't a background, it's my actual office. What are you doing to instill a little bit of humor and light, pun intended? What are you doing to support, whether that is, sending a candygram to someone's house, like just something to lift up the spirits more than ever. And it's not a religious holiday thing. It's just how are you going to help the joie de vivre of the team member? And if you can't do that, then you're a very selfish leader. And if, again, your pretense is such that you're more worried about your image, again, that's not a selfless leader. It's a selfish leader. So I really went tangential there, but I think ultimately,
I'm like, tell us how you really feel, Dan. Come on. You know what? Well, it's interesting though, because I think you're right. I mean, and I think because we work with so many performance-based organizations. And one of the things I've been finding very fascinating recently, we did this little, one of the assessments that we'll use with individuals and teams, because we're trying to help people shift behavior, including team behavior, right? Which is essentially culture. I get a kind of a window into the motivators of different levels of leadership, senior leadership. And I've noticed an interesting pattern, and that's in performance organizations. There's a couple of very typical motivators that I see come up for senior leaders. One is enduring. They like it hard, they like the challenge. The other is excelling, and the other is winning. And when you
Right.
have like a big energy drive at the top that's like that, there's a bunch of senior executives that actually they're pretty juiced about this pandemic. This is hitting them on a lot of the energy nerve centers that are in the positive, right? And so, but below, you know, it doesn't necessarily cascade down like that. And so I think for people like that, what I notice, to what you've said, send a candygram, take time at a meeting. It's so hard for those leaders to let go of, well, but we've got things to do and we've got big things and we're in a pandemic and we got to go. And, you know, I was kind of joking around with a client this morning who uses colors, insight colors. And, you know, green energy is the more people energy, right? It's that kind of more of that EQ type of energy. That organization tends to be quite red, which is the driver energy, the opposite. And I just said to them, you guys got to dial up your green. Like, I think this time of like really checking in with people and slow it down in order to be able to sustain. But white knuckling it through is not going to get you there.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you brought up the word win, which is so interesting because some people have challenged me in this, you know, title of the book. You put the word win in there, Dan. And I'll answer why, but I want to sort of make fun of the book as well by suggesting that there's another alter ego version of the book, and you just put an S, the letter S, in front of the word care, which obviously spells scare. And so there are far too many leaders who believe the mantra is lead, scare, and then win.
There's a lot of scared people out there right now.
Well, this is it. But the leaders whom apply that kind of aggressive, all hell's bells, you know, back to your kind of, we win by conquering, and do whatever we can to conquer. We are conquistadors. That's, I mean, sure, you could argue that it works, and it is certainly working in many cases, but how is it working? Is it working at the detriment of, you know, people's livelihoods, their health, their stress level, like, et cetera? But when, you know, lead, care, win as a formula, I actually play it backwards. If you want to win the hearts and minds of your people, you care in your leadership. And when you win the hearts and minds of your people, they go, and it's proven, and you know this because we're in the same business, they go above and beyond the call of duty when they feel loved, when they feel cared, when they feel that, you know, they're part of something.
There is so much data that will back that up. So much data. But there's a lot of, you know, if you're a leader who's hardwired around results, there's a lot of data that shows too, it's hard for people to balance both results and people in their brains at the same time, right? Matthew Lieberman's book looks at that. And you know, I think about that a lot because I think we reward in organizations those that are wired for driving results and getting results and and oh, you're not a good leader. Well, okay, but you're getting results. You got to start changing that. Like, what are you, again, going back to what are we rewarding for? What are we promoting? I mean, and you've run the big corporate leadership jungle. I mean, you go and talk to a sales leader about the fact that their sales manager, who's their top producer, is a jerk to work with. That's an interesting conversation. Had it many times, right? So we got to suck it up and go, the havoc that you got to, like, because when you do it once, you realize the havoc that person was wreaking on everything else wasn't actually worth the money they were bringing in the door. Right. So I see Grant's got a question. Grant's got a question for us. So that's great, guys. Start throwing in your questions. How do you lead when you have partners that don't do their jobs well? How do you lead when you have partners that don't do their jobs well? What do you think of that?
Well, I suppose it means a couple of things, i.e. what type of partner. That could be, you know, you've got partners in law, like that are partners in a business. You've got partners that you work with in order to, you know, collectively move towards the goal. So without kind of knowing necessarily specifically what type of partner, I think it's a question about subjectiveness as well. And I'm not knocking Grant, but that's one's interpretation of whether or not they're performing well or not well in their role. Let's assume that we have the ability to say they're underperforming as a partner in the collective effort of working on said initiative, project, whatever, goal of the company. Okay. I honestly believe in authenticity and the openness of having kind of what used to be the day when we used to have 360-degree feedback, and but it was anonymous. I never employed 360-degree feedback because I didn't believe in anonymity when you were being open with people you're working with. You need to be open. You need, and because whether there's a finger pointing back here, there's three pointing back at yourself. And so I always coached leaders, and still do, when they're having, and even if they're equals, if they're having a potentially, I guess, considered situation in which performance is not on par, or at least interpreted to be on par as to what is expected, you got to be brutally yet kindness, open and honest about what you perceive to be the breakdown, the mixed expectations, the whatever's missing. And because often what I found is that the kind of harboring of that, I find, at least in this country, is very Canadian. We're not openly able to have that conversation with someone else to say, here's where I think things are falling down. What do you see? We just kind of, we hold it back.
Or we work around, passive aggressive, right? Go around the problem.
Yeah. We've learned that passive aggressive from the Brits, by the way. So that's a whole other story. Another day. But again, if that's the perception, and Grant, I think your question is a great one. If you believe that the partner is subpar in performance, then you've got to open that up, that dialogue, because again, there may be something in the process. Maybe there's a process improvement piece that has to be, that you didn't know about. And that happens, right? Because you might think, the partner's not doing their job. Oh, God, they're awful. But they haven't been open enough with you to say, there's something in the way of me doing my job correctly, because you, the company, or you on the other side, there's an impediment, and you were blind to that. So it's another example of the more open and collaborative and transparent and authentic you are in these types of situations or conversations, to just get at it and then open up and see what happens. Step one. Now, let's assume that's all done. Let's assume that we are on the same page. Well, where is the organization's performance development kind of remedy plan? So we know that sometimes after you've invested time, you've invested development hours, you've pointed out the mishaps, you have tried your best to supplement the gap with fill in the blank, right? A coach, a training, anything, and it's still subpar. Well, again, something I find is at times horribly Canadian is that we'll suck it up, and we don't gracefully find a way in which either exit the person or to say, you know what, this is not for you. We have other roles for you. So maybe we could find a way in which for you to work over here over time. We like you. We think you're a good person. Your skill set is not suited for this particular endeavor. Could we work with you? And so again, we tend to, some of us, not all, harbor and not point out that this is not really a great fit. And so what happens is the leader or the high performers and try to pick up the slack of the underperformer, and there's resentment because we're not actually dealing with the problem in the first place. We're just letting it go. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, I love that, and I would say that I think the big problem we have is everything is dealt with so individually. And I think if we could just get together and go, I'm here to support you. How do we support each other? How do we work together? I got stuff that, you could write a book about my faults, like it's, easily. As leaders, we all have that thing that we're working on. But if we can all come together and say this, let's all kind of get on the same page and create a common language and support each other. I want you to be successful. I want you to do well, but we're very individualistic, right? We're very like, hey, that's that person, that's their problem, let's go off. And that's how we do development. It's all, kind of all of those ways, right? So, okay, I see Bruce has dropped in a comment, and it's actually, I don't think that there's a question in there, but it's a very nice comment. Just want to reinforce how Dan really is a leader who walks the talk. I was a student of Dan's back in the early 2000s, and he taught sustainability, innovative thinking, and empathy in ways well ahead of their time. His latest book synthesizes so many meaningful and useful practices. Thank you for another great contribution to society. How nice is that, Dan? Feeling Bruce, like the love there?
Bruce is a class act. He was president of his class. He's now a very heart-based, empathic CIO that is an incredible leader and contribution to British Columbia society. So nice of Bruce to show up here today. I appreciate that.
All right, well, in our last couple of minutes, one question I wanted to sort of leave off on is, I find like whenever, after I've done both, from the books that I've written, and even after I've written articles or things like that, sometimes I look back and I think, oh, there was one more thing I wanted to say, or I wish I'd sort of put that in more. Is there anything with Lead Care Win that, sitting here now that you're like, oh, here's your chance. You can just let us all know. Is there anything that was left hanging for you or that you wanted to?
It actually, yeah, and it's now become a book. So, yeah, I mean, talk about being a masochist.
Oh man,
I wrestled with one behavior that I couldn't quite include in one of the other 9 lessons, and then I had it separate, and I'm like, you know what? I don't like it enough to be included because I'm going to be talking about so many different other spin-off pieces to this. And anyway, so I suppose I'm announcing a book now, so that means I really have to write it. But the skeleton's done. I'll write it. But it's and maybe it's Pang Homage, my old buddy. But the book, I think, will be called Courage. And the kind of the lesson of courage has, and I'm glad I didn't put it in, by the way, because I have seen so many examples of courage throughout this pandemic, and I think they'll continue to surface. And so I'm kind of in chats and interviews, in folks, things like this with you, my friend, articles I'm reading. There is so much courage out there right now, and I think we can learn from other people's courage, both as a leader of self and a leader of others. So I'm glad I didn't put it in. It hit me right in the head in June that I think it has to be a book now. And so Courage the book at some point looks like it'll be out there.
I'm excited. That sounds great. Boy, because we need a lot of courage. Well, Dan, I want to thank you. I know we've got a couple of little lasting notes, but thank you so much for being with us today and for releasing this into the world. For everybody on the call, we're going to be sending out, I always send out like, what are 3 things that I learned from the conversation? I probably learned about 20 today, but my top 3, I'm going to send out my top 3. We'll send a link to Dan's website. You can get a copy of the book. This is one of those books, guys, that I would highly recommend you buy for your teams, because you can dive in. What I love about this book is you can dive into it chapter to chapter, and you don't have to, like I would say, you don't have to read the whole book. The whole book is great to read, but if you just want to sort of focus in on one area, and I think I would even use the wheel as a bit of a team diagnosis to say, as a team, those of you who lead teams, what is an area that we could be having more conversation about right now, right? So super useful. I love the practical takeaway tips. The summary, those of you with short attention spans, you can get the the quick tips and takeaways at the end of every chapter. So Really one of those books that's a terrific book for all of us to have. So thank you, Dan, so much.
So you are so kind, my friend. I am, for your audience, you figure out how to give it away, but I'll give you to give away a free license to the Lead Care Win learning program, which has all 9 lessons, 16 hours of content, videos, audio. I write 9 poems. Yeah, you give away 1 free license to any of the people that showed up today, and I'll let you figure out how to do that.
Okay, so we'll put something in the follow-up, and whoever gets to it first, you're going to get this very generous offer from Dan. So thank you so much. Thank you. So just to kind of let everybody know, I think our next session is coming up in a couple of weeks, and I think Shelby, remind me who that's going to be with again. We don't need to go to slide. Oh, she's going to go to slides. Keep going, Shelby. Let's go to the last slide. Here we go. Oh, it's with Diane. So Diane Hamilton, we're talking about curiosity. So that is one of Dan's principles, and we're going to do a deep dive. She's done a ton of research on curiosity and how you can cultivate that, and what kind of gets in the way of curiosity in our workplace. So that's going to be a great conversation. All right.
Tell Diane I said hello.
Oh yeah,
when you see her.
She's great too. Awesome. Okay, thank you everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week. This was a fun way to spend Hump Day for sure. All of you.
Thank you so much for the invite. Thanks everyone. Love you. Take care. Thanks, Bruce.
All right. Bye everybody.